He found an Apache mother and her daughter freezing in the storm. What he did defied everything. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the frozen fields of the ranch. A cold wind swept through the land, carrying with it the first hints of a coming storm. The rancher, a tall man with weathered hands and a face hardened by years of outdoor work, pulled his coat tighter around him and scanned the horizon. He had lived on this land all his life and knew the signs when the weather was turning dangerous. Still, there was something unusual about the way the wind whispered tonight, a sharpness that made him uneasy. He moved carefully among the cattle, checking the fences and making sure the gates were secure. Snowflakes began to fall lightly, settling on the ground and glinting in the last light of day. At first, they were just a gentle dusting, but soon the flakes grew heavier, thickening into a steady blanket that made the world look soft and unreal. The rancher could see his breath in the cold air as he walked, each exhale disappearing almost as quickly as it came. As he reached the far edge of his property, near a small stand of trees that had survived countless storms, something caught his eye. At first he thought it was just a shadow, perhaps a branch bending under the snow. But then he saw the shape more clearly. A woman, crouched low, holding a small child close to her chest. Their figures were hunched against the wind, trying to shield themselves from the snow that stung like tiny needles. The rancher's heart tightened. It was rare for anyone to be out in this weather, let alone a woman and a child who looked as fragile as snow themselves. He felt a surge of concern and urgency. Without a second thought, he started moving toward them, his boots crunching through the new snow. The wind whipped around him, tugging at his coat and hair, but he didn't slow down. His mind raced with possibilities, all of them alarming. They could be lost, injured, or worse, caught in the storm with no way to survive the night. As he drew closer, he could see the fear and exhaustion etched into their faces. The mother's cheeks were flush red from the cold, her lips chapped and trembling. The little girl, no more than 6 or 7, clung tightly to her mother's side, her small face pale, and her eyes wide with confusion and terror. They were soaked through, and the snow already clung to their hair and clothing, freezing against their skin. The sight stirred something deep within him, a mixture of alarm and determination. He knew that if he didn't act fast, the storm could claim them.
Hey!
"Are you all right?" he called, his voice loud against the howl of the wind. He tried to sound calm, even though his pulse was racing. The woman flinched as if expecting some danger, and the little girl hid her face against her mother's shoulder. It took a few moments before the mother looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was relief there, mingled with disbelief, as if she could hardly believe someone had come to help. "We're lost," the woman said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "We don't know how to get home." The rancher nodded, understanding immediately. "Don't worry, you're safe now. I'm going to get you out of this storm," he said. He knelt down, brushing some snow from the woman's sleeve. "We need to get you somewhere warm, fast. Can you stand?" The woman tried to rise, but her legs trembled and her strength was failing. The rancher stepped closer, offering his arm. "I've got you," he said. Gently, carefully, he helped her up. The little girl clung to her mother but looked at him with wide, uncertain eyes. He smiled gently at her. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." The wind had grown stronger, and the snow fell in heavy sheets obscuring the path ahead. The rancher knew that moving through the storm would be difficult, but he had no choice. He wrapped a spare blanket around the woman's shoulders and lifted the child into his arms. The girl's small body was ice cold, and she shivered violently against him. He held her close, trying to offer warmth and reassurance. As they began the slow walk back toward the rancher's mind was alert to every sound and movement. The snow made it hard to see, and the wind threatened to knock them off balance. His boots sank into the drifts, and he struggled to maintain footing. But he kept moving, driven by a single thought. They had to survive this storm. The mother followed closely, leaning on him for support. She whispered her gratitude, but her voice was weak, almost drowned by the storm. The rancher nodded, focusing on the path ahead rather than the words. He knew that talking could wait until they were safe, Every step was a challenge, and the cold seemed to pierce through even the thick layers of clothing. Yet he kept going, moving steadily, guided by his knowledge of the land. After what felt like an eternity, he spotted the outline of his cabin through the blizzard. It was small but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. A warm glow shone faintly from the windows, promising safety and heat. The sight gave him a surge of hope and energy. He quickened his pace, slipping slightly on the icy ground but recovering each time. The mother and child followed, leaning on him and each other for support. When they finally reached the cabin, he helped the woman inside first, then set the little girl down near the fire. The warmth hit them immediately, and the shivering began to subside. The mother sank into a chair, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself, while the girl pressed her small hands against the fire, her eyes wide with wonder and relief. The rancher removed his coat and gloves, feeling the chill in his own body but ignoring it. He quickly started a larger fire, stacking wood and blowing gently to encourage the flames. The mother watched him, still cautious but clearly grateful. She had expected danger, cruelty, or indifference, but instead she found kindness and courage. The rancher's quiet strength and determination had become their lifeline. He fetched hot water and a few simple supplies from his pantry. There were basic rations, bread, cheese, and some canned food, but it was enough to offer warmth and sustenance. He handed a small cup of warm water to the mother and another to the girl. They sipped slowly, savoring the warmth as much as the water itself. The storm continued outside, relentless and merciless, but inside the cabin there was a fragile sense of safety and hope. The rancher sat down across from them, watching carefully as they regained some strength. He asked softly, "How did you end up out there?" The mother took a shaky breath. "We were traveling home," she explained. "We didn't expect the storm. It came so suddenly. We tried to find shelter, but there was nothing. We were just lost, and we didn't know what to do." Her voice faltered, and she looked at the floor. The rancher nodded, understanding all too well the dangers of the wild land and unpredictable weather. "You're safe now," he said again. "That's what matters. You can rest here until the storm passes." For the first time since the storm had begun, the mother allowed herself to relax, though only slightly. She glanced at the little girl who had begun to warm up by the fire, her eyes brightening as she smiled at the rancher. It was a small gesture, but it carried enormous weight, a silent thank you, a recognition of the protection he had provided. Outside, the storm raged on, howling through the trees and across the fields. But inside the cabin, the trio found warmth, safety, and a temporary peace. The rancher remained alert, listening to the wind and watching for any signs of further danger. But he also felt a quiet satisfaction. He had acted without hesitation, guided by instinct and compassion, and now 2 lives had been spared from the storm. As night fell, the mother and daughter huddled together, wrapped in blankets, while the rancher kept the fire going and checked the doors and windows. The snow continued to fall, heavy and unrelenting, but for now it could not reach them here. The rancher knew the night would be long, and the storm would not end quickly, but he was determined to stay vigilant. They were safe tonight, and that was enough. And so, in the small cabin on the frozen ranch, a quiet bond began to form between the 3 strangers, brought together by chance, courage, and a storm. Outside, the world was white and wild, but inside there was warmth, hope, and the promise that they could endure the night together. The storm showed no mercy as the night deepened. The wind roared against the walls of the cabin, rattling the windows and sending flurries of snow swirling in the air. Inside, the mother and her daughter huddled together, wrapped tightly in blankets, while the rancher worked quietly near the fire. He moved with calm efficiency, stacking wood, checking the doors, and keeping an eye on the mother and child. Every few minutes he glanced at the windows, listening to the wind howl across the frozen fields. The mother's hand shook slightly as she held her daughter close, still feeling the lingering cold from the hours spent in the storm. She whispered softly to the girl, trying to comfort her, though her own voice trembled. The little girl pressed her face against her mother's chest, finding warmth in the human contact. But the fear in her eyes remained. It was clear that the cold, exhaustion, and terror of the storm had left a mark on both of them. The rancher knelt beside them, offering a gentle smile. "You're going to be okay," he said. "The storm is strong, yes, but it cannot touch you here. You're safe for now. I'll make sure of it." His voice was calm, steady, and filled with a quiet authority that seemed to soothe both the mother and child. Hours passed slowly. Outside, the blizzard raged, turning the world into a white, frozen wasteland. Inside the cabin, the rancher made small, careful preparations. He fetched extra blankets from his storage, laid down a thick layer near the fire for the little girl to sit on, and poured a small cup of warm soup for her mother. Each act was deliberate, each motion gentle, showing care without overwhelming them. Despite the warmth and safety, the mother's worry remained. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We shouldn't have come out here. We should have waited for help. We didn't mean to be in danger." Her voice was filled with guilt and exhaustion. The rancher shook his head. "It's not your fault. Storms like this come without warning. You did what you could. The important thing is that you're here now, and we'll get through this together." He paused, glancing toward the child. "And you," he said softly. "You're very brave. You stayed close to your mother the whole time. That's what helped both of you survive." The little girl blinked at him, her eyes wide and unsure. A small smile appeared on her lips, the first sign of hope in what felt like an endless night. She clutched a blanket around her, feeling its warmth seep into her cold limbs. As the night wore on, the rancher knew that staying in the cabin was only a temporary solution. They could survive here tonight, but eventually, they would need to leave to find proper help and safety beyond the ranch. The thought weighed heavily on his mind. The storm outside was relentless, and the roads were likely impassable. He would have to guide them through the snow if they were to reach anyone who could truly help. By the early hours of the morning, the storm began to show no signs of slowing. The snow piled higher, forming drifts against the cabin walls. The wind blew fiercely, rattling every branch and tree outside. The rancher checked on the mother and child, finding them still huddled together, their small faces pale but alive. He knelt down beside them. "We're going to have to leave soon," he said gently.
"I can help you, but we have to be careful. The snow is deep, and it's easy to get lost."
The mother's eyes widened. "Leave? Now?" "The storm is. It's too dangerous." She protested. Fear and worry filled her voice, and she gripped her daughter tightly. The rancher nodded, understanding her concern. "I know it's scary," he said, "but staying here isn't safe forever. You need food, warmth, and people who can help you properly. I can guide you. I know the land. You won't be alone." He spent the next hour preparing them for the journey. He gathered blankets, tied extra layers around their bodies, and secured a sturdy rope that could help guide them if visibility dropped. He checked his own supplies, making sure he had enough food and water for the trip. Then, he carefully lifted the little girl into his arms. She shivered violently against him, her small body trembling from cold and fear. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." His words were firm but comforting, a promise that brought a flicker of trust into the mother's eyes. Slowly, carefully, they stepped out into the storm. The wind slammed against them, driving the snow into their faces. The rancher shielded the child with his coat, moving steadily despite the drifts that reached his knees. Every step was a battle, but he refused to stop. The mother followed, gripping his arm for support, trusting him despite the fear that lingered. The world outside was white and unforgiving. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the sound of the wind drowned out all other noise. The rancher relied on his instincts, memory of the land, and careful observation to guide them. He paused frequently, checking the mother's strength and adjusting the child in his arms. "Almost there," he said encouragingly. "Just a little further." Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. The rancher's boots sank into the snow with every step, and the cold gnawed at their bodies. Yet he refused to give in. He could see the determination in the mother's eyes, the trust slowly growing in her gaze, and he drew strength from it. They were depending on him, and he would not fail them. At one point, the little girl began to cry softly, exhausted and frightened. The rancher paused and knelt down, holding her gently. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here. You're safe. We're going to get through this." He stroked her hair and let her rest against his chest for a moment. The warmth of human touch was more powerful than anything else in that cold, white world. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the silhouette of another small building appeared through the storm. It was a neighboring farmhouse, far enough that no one would usually see the rancher's cabin from it, but close enough to offer help. Relief washed over him, and he quickened his pace, keeping a steady hold on both the mother and child. They reached the farmhouse door, battered and exhausted just as the wind howled louder than ever. The rancher knocked firmly, shouting over the storm. Moments later, a light flickered inside, and a man appeared, surprised to see them in such weather. The rancher quickly explained the situation, and the neighbor hurried to help bring them inside. Inside the farmhouse, the warmth was immediate. The mother sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face as she finally allowed herself to relax. The little girl clung to her mother but smiled faintly, feeling safe at last. The rancher set down the child and offered her a warm drink, while the mother tried to find words for her gratitude. "You saved us," she whispered. I don't know how to thank you." The rancher shook his head. "No thanks needed," he said simply. "We all have to help each other. That's what matters." His eyes softened as he looked at the little girl. "And you were very brave, too. Don't forget that." They stayed in the farmhouse for several hours, recovering from the storm. The mother and child ate, drank warm soup, and rested near the fire. The rancher remained with them, making sure they were comfortable and safe, even though his own body ached from the long, difficult journey. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside there was peace. The world beyond might be harsh, but for now, they had warmth, safety, and human kindness. As dawn began to break, the storm finally started to ease. The snow still fell lightly, but the wind had lessened, and the sky was slowly brightening. The rancher helped the mother and child prepare to continue their journey to proper help. The experience had bonded them, created trust, and given them hope. They knew that without his courage and determination, the night might have ended very differently. Before they left, the mother took the rancher's hand, gripping it tightly. "You risked everything for us," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll never forget what you did." The little girl added her own quiet, shy thank you, a small smile breaking through her weariness. The rancher simply nodded. "You survived. That's what matters," he said. "Now go and stay safe." With that, they stepped out into the snow again, ready to continue their journey, guided by the strength and courage that had carried them through the worst of the storm. For the rancher, it was a night he would never forget. He had faced the storm not just of nature but of fear and urgency, and had come through with 2 lives saved. He knew that sometimes courage meant stepping into the unknown, acting without hesitation, and trusting that humanity and kindness were stronger than the harshest winds. And so the mother and daughter continued on, their hearts warmed by the memory of a man who had defied the storm itself to save them. The rancher watched them disappear into the snowy landscape, feeling a quiet pride and a deep satisfaction. The storm was over for them, at least for now, and a bond had been formed that would never be forgotten. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows of the farmhouse, soft and pale against the lingering snow outside. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet blanket of white over the land, but the world was still cold and fragile. Inside, the mother and her daughter sat near the fire, wrapped in blankets, their faces slowly regaining color after the long night of fear and exposure. The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the memory of the storm, making the cabin feel like a sanctuary from the harshness of the outside world. The rancher sat quietly nearby, his eyes scanning the mother and child as they stirred. He had stayed awake through much of the night, attentive to their needs, and now he was taking a moment to allow them some rest. Their survival had depended on his vigilance, but now, as the danger passed, he allowed himself to relax slightly, though he remained alert. The mother, still shaken, tried to gather her strength. Her hands were red and stiff from the cold, but she wrapped them around the small cup of warm tea the rancher had made. She lifted it slowly to her lips, savoring the warmth that flowed through her. The little girl clung to her mother, peeking over the edge of the blanket with wide, curious eyes. The fear from the storm had not fully left her, but she began to relax under the watchful gaze of the rancher, who moved with quiet assurance. "You saved us," the mother whispered again, her voice trembling. I don't know how to repay you." Her eyes glistened with gratitude and lingering worry. The rancher shook his head. "No repayment is necessary," he said simply. "I did what anyone should do. People need to help each other. That's all." His tone was calm, steady, and honest. Yet beneath the simplicity of his words, there was a depth of care and courage that the mother could see clearly. The little girl, still shy, finally spoke. I'm hungry," she said softly, her voice small but filled with trust in the presence of the man who had saved them. The rancher smiled gently. "You will be," he said. He moved to fetch some food, opening the pantry to reveal simple provisions: bread, cheese, and a small amount of meat he had reserved. It was not much, but it was enough to provide warmth and energy. He returned to the fire, placing a plate in front of the girl and helping her eat. Slowly the mother watched, her eyes filled with relief. For the first time in a long while she felt a small spark of hope that they might survive the aftermath of the storm. Hours passed as the mother and daughter regained some strength. The mother spoke cautiously, telling fragments of their story. They had been traveling to visit relatives in another town, but the storm had caught them unprepared, forcing them to seek shelter wherever they could. Their journey had been long and exhausting, filled with worry about the weather and the unknown terrain. She spoke softly, pausing often to tend to her daughter, who remained close by, absorbing the safety and warmth that surrounded them. The rancher listened carefully, offering reassurance and support, without pressing for more than they were willing to share. His presence was steady and non-intrusive, giving them the space to recover while subtly establishing a sense of trust. Every so often he would check the windows, make sure the fire burned steadily, or fetch another blanket. His actions were quiet demonstrations of care, showing that he was not only capable but also genuinely concerned for their well-being. As the day moved forward, the mother began to ask questions about the rancher. She wanted to know who he was, how long he had lived on the land, and why he had risked so much to help strangers. The rancher answered simply, speaking of his life on the ranch, the challenges of the land, and the responsibility he felt toward those in need. He explained that storms like the one they had endured were dangerous for anyone caught unprepared, and he could not ignore the sight of people suffering in the cold. The mother listened intently, her eyes softening as she absorbed his words. "It's rare to meet someone like you," she said quietly. "Someone who would risk themselves for others, even strangers." The rancher shrugged, a small, humble gesture.
"It's what anyone should do," he replied. "We all depend on each other, especially when nature shows its strength."
"The important thing is that you and your daughter are safe now." As the day progressed, the mother and daughter began to engage more naturally with the rancher. The little girl, curious and more relaxed than before, asked questions about the fire, the blankets, and even the rancher's horse. The rancher answered patiently, sometimes with a touch of humor to ease the tension, showing that even in hardship, life could still carry small moments of warmth and laughter. The mother began to share more of her concerns, speaking of the journey they had planned, the challenges of traveling alone, and the fear she had felt for her daughter's safety. Each word was met with understanding and empathy from the rancher. He offered advice and reassurance, guiding her to practical solutions for their next steps, while emphasizing patience and caution in the harsh winter environment. By evening, the mother had begun to relax, her gratitude now mixed with a cautious trust. She allowed herself to rest, knowing that the rancher would watch over them through the night. The little girl, exhausted but comforted, had fallen asleep near the fire, her small breaths slow and steady. The rancher sat nearby, observing the two with a quiet sense of responsibility and care. His mind reflected on the night before, on the danger they had all faced, and on the relief that they had survived together. Outside, the snow continued to settle, covering the world in a quiet white blanket. The wind had calmed, leaving only the occasional gust that rattled the cabin walls. Inside, the warmth of human connection and the safety of shelter created a contrast to the harshness of the storm. The rancher knew that their journey was not yet over, but for now, they were protected, nourished, and alive. He spent part of the night preparing for the next day. He cleaned the small area near the fire, arranged the blankets for maximum warmth, and ensured that their path forward would be as safe as possible once they left the farmhouse. Each small action reflected his careful attention and his desire to protect them fully, not just from the storm, but from the lingering dangers of the winter landscape. The mother awoke briefly during the night, glancing at the rancher with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with a deep, heartfelt emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you." The rancher gave her a small nod. "You don't have to thank me. You're alive, and that's what matters. We'll get you to safety tomorrow. Rest now." His calm tone reassured her, allowing her to drift back to sleep, comforted by his presence. The little girl stirred but remained asleep, dreaming peacefully for the first time in what felt like days. The rancher watched over her, silently promising that he would ensure her safety until they were out of danger. He thought of the challenges that lay ahead, the need to navigate the snow-covered land to reach proper help, but he felt confident. His knowledge of the terrain, combined with the trust he had built with the mother, would guide them safely forward. Morning arrived with a pale, icy light. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world calm and still. The rancher awoke the mother and child gently, offering warm water and simple food to prepare them for the next part of their journey. They ate slowly, taking time to regain energy and strength. The mother's hands were still red and stiff, but her spirit was stronger. The little girl, more alert and curious than before, clung to her mother while taking small bites of food. The rancher gathered their belongings, checking each item carefully. Blankets, food, and a small amount of water were packed, and the rope he had brought the day before was secured. He explained to the mother how they would travel, emphasizing caution and teamwork. The mother listened closely, nodding and showing a growing trust in his judgment. The little girl watched quietly, sensing the importance of the moment and the care surrounding her. Before they left, the mother spoke quietly to the rancher. "I feel safe with you," she said. "I know there's still a journey ahead, but I trust you." The rancher nodded, appreciating the weight of her words. Trust was earned, not given, and he felt the responsibility keenly. He adjusted the blankets around the child, ensuring she would stay warm during the journey, and offered his arm to the mother. Together they stepped out into the snowy world, ready to continue forward. The landscape was breathtaking in its quiet beauty, the snow sparkling in the pale morning light. Yet it remained dangerous, with hidden drifts and slippery patches that could cause harm if not approached carefully. The rancher led them steadily, guiding each step, checking the path ahead, and adjusting their pace to match the mother and child's strength. Every movement was deliberate, every decision cautious, reflecting the care and responsibility he felt toward them. By midday, they had made significant progress. The mother's confidence grew with each step, her trust in the rancher solidifying further. The little girl began to ask questions, and the rancher answered patiently, sharing small stories and observations to keep her engaged and calm. Their journey was still challenging, but with guidance, preparation, and trust, it became manageable. As the day drew to a close, the rancher spotted a familiar landmark in the distance. A small, friendly settlement where help and shelter would be available. Relief washed over him, and he quickened his pace, careful to maintain safety. The mother and child followed closely, their energy renewed by hope and trust. When they finally reached the settlement, they were welcomed by kind faces, warmth, and safety. The mother hugged her daughter tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. The little girl smiled shyly at the rancher, who nodded with quiet satisfaction. Their journey through danger and fear had not broken them. It had strengthened them and created bonds that would last a lifetime. The sun had begun its slow climb in the pale morning sky, casting soft light over the snow-covered landscape. The world was quiet. The storm that had threatened so many lives now only a memory in the white fields and frosted trees. The rancher led the mother and her daughter through the crisp air, each step deliberate and careful. The snow beneath their feet crunched softly, and the cold, while still biting, no longer felt as menacing. Hope had returned, carried in each careful stride and each steady breath. The mother walked with renewed determination, her trust in the rancher growing with every step. Her daughter, now alert and curious, occasionally skipped slightly, eager to reach the safety that had been promised. The rancher kept a steady pace, occasionally adjusting the blankets and coats around the two to shield them from the lingering chill. Despite the exhausting journey of the past 2 days, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. Every movement, every careful decision was guided by a single thought: ensuring their safety. As they traveled, the rancher talked to the mother, keeping her mind occupied with practical advice and small stories about the land. "See that ridge over there?" he said, pointing to a faint line of hills in the distance. "If we follow it, it will lead us directly to the settlement. There's a small path that isn't always visible in the snow, but it's safe." His voice was calm and reassuring, filled with the authority of someone who knew the land intimately. The mother nodded, absorbing his words, while her daughter listened quietly, peeking up at the rancher with wide, trusting eyes. "Are we going to be okay?" the little girl asked softly. "You're going to be just fine," the rancher replied with a small smile. "We're almost there. You've been very brave and you'll be safe soon." His words, simple but sincere, seemed to ease her anxiety. The girl clutched the blanket around her, leaning slightly toward the rancher as they continued along the snow-covered path. Hours passed slowly, but steadily. The journey was challenging, even without the storm, and the cold continued to bite at their fingers and faces. Yet there was a growing sense of confidence in the mother's eyes. She trusted the rancher completely now, knowing that he had guided them through the worst of the storm and would continue to keep them safe. Every time she stumbled in the snow, he was there to steady her. Every time her daughter hesitated, he offered a kind word or a gentle hand to reassure her. By midday, the first signs of the settlement appeared over the distant ridge. Smoke rose from chimneys, and faint sounds of life reached their ears through the still, cold air. Relief washed over the mother and daughter, their steps quickening slightly as they moved toward the promise of warmth and help. The rancher stayed close, maintaining a careful watch, ensuring they remained safe as they approached the cluster of buildings. When they arrived, a group of villagers noticed them immediately. The mother called out for help, and soon they were met with warm coats, blankets, and kind hands. People offered hot drinks, food, and a place to rest. The little girl's eyes widened in amazement as she took in the welcoming faces and the fire that roared warmly in the village hall. For the first time in what felt like days, she smiled freely, the tension and fear of the storm replaced with comfort and safety. The mother turned to the rancher, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You risked your life for us, and we would have been lost without you." The rancher shook his head humbly. "No thanks are needed," he replied. "You and your daughter are safe now, and that's all that matters." "That's enough for me." His voice was quiet but filled with sincerity. He had acted not for recognition or reward, but because it was the right thing to do, and seeing them safe brought him the satisfaction he needed. The villagers began to assist the mother and daughter, offering warm food, blankets, and a place to stay while arrangements were made for their continued journey. The mother looked at the rancher, her gratitude evident in every line of her face. She had come to trust him completely, and the bond formed through their shared struggle would not be forgotten. The little girl tugged gently on the rancher's sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered, her small voice filled with sincerity. "I was scared, but you helped me." He smiled, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. "You were very brave, too," he said. "Bravery isn't just about facing storms outside. It's about keeping hope inside, even when things feel scary." "Who did that?" The girl's eyes shone, and she nodded, a newfound confidence growing within her. As the day passed, the mother and daughter began to regain their strength fully. They shared stories of their lives, and the rancher listened, offering advice and encouragement when appropriate. The bond formed through the storm had created trust and respect, and now it blossomed into friendship. They laughed softly, exchanged small smiles, and began to feel like the world was safe again. The rancher reflected on the events of the past days. The storm had been fierce, almost unrelenting, and the night they had spent in the cabin had tested all of them. Yet, through courage, patience, and simple acts of kindness, they had survived. The mother and daughter had shown resilience and trust, and he had learned the power of quiet determination and careful action in the face of danger. By evening, arrangements had been made for the mother and daughter to travel safely to their final destination, where relatives awaited them. The rancher helped them prepare, ensuring they had food, warm clothing, and clear directions. He checked their supplies carefully, adjusting blankets and packs, and made sure that the little girl would be comfortable for the journey. Before they left, the mother hugged the rancher tightly.
"I will never forget you," she said softly. "You didn't just save our lives."
"You gave us hope, too." The little girl wrapped her small arms around his waist. "Thank you," she whispered again, a shy but genuine smile on her face. The rancher nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "You've been brave," he said. "Now go, and stay safe. Remember what we learned. Courage and kindness can carry you through even the toughest storms." As they departed toward the next village, the rancher watched them walk safely down the path, the snow crunching beneath their feet. The settlement gradually disappeared behind them, but he knew that the bond formed in the storm would remain in their hearts forever. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his actions had made a real difference in the lives of two people who would have faced disaster without his help. The rancher returned to his own land tired but content. The storm had tested his strength, patience, and determination, but it had also reminded him of the importance of courage and human kindness. He reflected on the lessons learned, that even in the harshest conditions, compassion and action could save lives. That sometimes the simplest gestures, a warm blanket, a guiding hand, or a steady voice, could mean the difference between survival and tragedy. As night fell on his ranch, he looked out over the snow-covered fields, the moonlight glinting on the white landscape. The storm was gone, replaced by calm and quiet, but the memory of the mother and daughter remained vivid. Their faces filled with relief, gratitude, and trust would stay with him always. He knew that their journey had changed them, as it had changed him. The power of human kindness had been tested and proven, and that knowledge brought him peace. In the following days, the mother and daughter safely reached their relatives, warm and cared for, forever grateful for the courage of the rancher who had appeared when they needed help most. They told their story to anyone who would listen, speaking of the bravery, kindness, and patience that had saved them. Their words inspired others, a reminder that one person's courage could create ripples of hope and safety. And the rancher, back on his land, continued his life quietly, tending to his cattle, repairing fences, and watching over the fields. Yet he carried with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference. In a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, he had acted with compassion and courage, proving that even in the coldest storms, humanity could shine brightly. The snow slowly melted, rivers began to flow again, and life returned to the land. But the story of that winter storm, of the mother and daughter rescued from freezing and fear, remained. It became a quiet legend among the villages nearby, a story of bravery, trust, and the power of one person to change lives. Years later, the mother and daughter would often speak of the rancher with fondness, remembering how he appeared like a guardian in the storm. They would tell their children and grandchildren about the man who had risked everything to save them, ensuring that courage, kindness, and hope were never forgotten. For the rancher, it remained a simple truth. In moments of crisis, doing the right thing mattered more than fear, more than recognition, more than anything else. And in doing so, he had not only saved lives, but had strengthened the invisible threads that connected all people, the threads of trust, courage, and human kindness that could never be broken, even by the fiercest storm.